Hi, my name is Brittany J Jones. In this video, I will be demonstrating how to do a hem stitch. You will use a hem stitch if you are finishing off the hem of your garment using seam binding or bias tape. I will be using bias tape in this demonstration. Let's get started. To demonstrate a hem stitch, I will be using this fabric here. A hem stitch is done by hand, so you will need a needle and thread. And as you can see, I have the thread single thread knotted here. So only one end of the thread has a knot. This stitch is commonly done when the hem allowance is finished with seam binding. For this example, I finished mine with bias tape. To begin the stitch, we're going to start here at the seam allowance. So I'm actually going to come under the seam allowance like so and start right here at the seam, bringing it through. Okay, once we have brought it through the seam allowance, we can begin our stitch. I'm going to come over here to the top of the hem tape, or in my case, bias tape, and I'm just going to come through like so. Once I've brought it through the top of the hem tape, or in my case, the bias tape, I'm going to come over here to the garment. I'm just going to pick up a thread here. Although I'm still on the seam allowance, I'm still just going to pick up a thread, bring that through, and you want to make sure that you are 1/4 inch from where you first started your stitch. If it helps, you could get a seam gauge out to make sure that you are 1/4 inch from where you started your stitch, and then you're just going to continue going. I'm going to come across here on the hem tape, right along the top. I'm going to grab a thread. I'm going to just grab a little bit along the top there, and I'm going to come over to the garment, grabbing a thread. And again, once you grab the thread and come out, you want to just make sure that you are 1/4 inch from where your previous stitch was. And then you just continue your stitch. I'm going to come here along the top of the hem stitch. Just going to grab a little piece of fabric here. Just going to grab a little bit of the top of the bias tape or hem tape like so. And then we're just going to come across. I'm going to grab just one thread of fabric. Pull that through, and where you're coming out at, the distance between this, you want it to be 1/4 inch. Okay, now I'm going to come over here and just grab a little bit along the top of the bias tape, bring my thread through like so, come back across onto the fabric, and just grab one thread. Make sure that you're just grabbing one thread because we don't want this to show on the right side of our garment. And again, make sure that you are 1/4 inch away from your previous stitch. If it helps, again, you can grab a seam gauge to measure, or I've even seen a tip where you could mark 1/4 inch on your finger so that it's easier to just put your finger up here so that you see where you're coming out at and where you're starting at. If you are experienced with your hand sewing, then you can pick up more stitches before you draw your needle out. So I've just come up over here on the garment. Now I can come across on the bias tape here, can draw up a little there, and then come back across to the garment, picking up a thread and then coming back over into the bias tape and then pulling through. So that's also an option if you are more experienced with hand sewing. You can do more stitches before you draw your needle out. But just continue working your stitch. All right, once you have worked your stitch, you can go ahead and tie it off. Once you have tied a knot, you can bury your thread into your bias tape. So I'm just going to travel that through, bring it out, clip off the thread. This is what the stitch looks like on the inside of the garment, and this is what it looks like on the right side of the garment. If you are using coordinating thread that matches your fabric, you will not be able to see the picks on the fabric, but do make sure that when you are picking up a thread that you really do try to just get one thread. That way your stitch is invisible as possible on the right side of your fabric. And one more time, this is the inside. I hope you've enjoyed seeing how to do a hem stitch.